Hey guys, welcome to the farm and welcome to the second video of the 3-video series that we're doing on the changing of the rut changing as we know it, what that means, how to react to it, how to prepare for it, going into the second rut and going into next year on your hunting strategies, right? So today, so let's start here. Last video we talked about some date specific stuff, some eye openers, if you will, on the points of, you know, everybody's got kind of a very tight window approach when talking about the peak of the rut, and what if things don't go as planned the year before as far as breeding dates. Where does that leave you? So what you'll see if you go back on video 1 is there's a potential this season with that doe that we used as an example of being bred November 15th. There's actually 3 or 4 possibilities of that deer being bred over the hunting season in the hunting season window that a lot of folks don't take into consideration, because, you know, is it October 27th this year that she got bred? Was it was it into December? Was it the 22nd of December, or will it be the 22nd of December? Where did she get bred? That is the question. Now, we're working on law of averages, right? So what today we're going to talk about is we're going to talk about the 3 major influences that we have, that we can do ourselves as hunters, as sportsmen and habitat improvers. What 3 things that we can do to change that, or what we have been doing that is making and influencing the change. So the number one thing we're going to talk about, the influencers, is doe numbers and herd numbers in general. What do you do with certain maturity levels of does? Not knowing what does were bred, what does weren't, is a part of this equation that changes a lot of what the good Lord is trying to set in place for us per your region, per your climate, per your temperature. And what I mean by that is this: if you're involved in a deer camp, or just a mindset of yourself, taking into some influences and some comments, or someone trying to persuade you that just because the neighbor down the road, or just because your hunting partner 2 hours from you needs to shoot a dozen does off their 80 acres, doesn't mean that you'd have to. If you get caught in that mindset of that trap, it doesn't matter what we covered in the number 1 video, or the first video of this series, is because that ended. As soon as you pull the trigger, that doe harvest now is in your hands, in your control, and so it's a huge deal. So what does it mean in season? 1, when do you harvest these does? Do you harvest these does? If you're one to harvest does early, which I don't recommend, the first couple of days of October, to get your equipment tuned in, and it's somewhere where the doe is not going to run into the rest of the property, and you're not going to destroy everything and start that chain of pressure. I'm all about shooting does early, really early. I'm not all about shooting does during the rut, unless it's a situation like you've always heard, you kill a buck or kill a doe after you've got a buck on the ground. I'm all about that. The question is if you need to harvest does in your area. So what we do as hunters influences and breaks that chain that the good Lord is trying to set forth in our area. So the more that we try to do the good, I find is a lot of times we're doing the opposite. We're doing the bad. Those buck to doe ratios, that ratio word that you hear of, it gets a lot of folks in trouble, because the 1-to-1 buck to doe ratio, throw it out the window. 2-to-1 buck to doe ratio, throw it out the window. We're talking about small, everyday, you and I parcels like I deal with here around the country. And I deal with large, properties. I deal with small properties. But the average last year, for the last couple of years over time here, has been somewhere between 40 and 60 acres. Maybe this year, because I got some large parcels coming, maybe it'll be 50, 60 acres. I don't know. But it's not thousands of acres. And I think the majority of us that are tuning into this can attach ourselves to that, knowing that that's what we have to deal with. Now, if you're in a co-op or if you're in an area where you guys are working together to see what your doe numbers are, then I'm all about harvesting does if your area needs does harvested. Now, if so what does that mean when I'm saying, 1-to-1 and 2-to-1 isn't the ratio? What I'm saying is it's not, that might be the ratio that your property needs to keep things function, but that's not a set in stone. Your property has to be 2-to-1 because it all is all dictated. What we're going to touch on here on the maturity level of those said does. Is it mature does or is it immature does? It all dictates in the end, and it all influences the change of the rut. So I highly recommend looking into that, really studying through your trail camera pictures and sightings on the farm. Do you need to harvest does? Do you not? If you start harvesting too many does, we'll end on that, and then we'll go to the second point here, the second influencer. But if you start harvesting too many does, don't complain about not experiencing the rut if you don't have one of the major parts of the rut to begin with, the doe. If you don't have the right numbers of does, you're not going to experience the first rut, and you're surely not going to experience the power of the second rut if you start harvesting does that don't need to be harvested. So keep that in mind. So number 2, there's a point that I'm going to touch on here going into number 2. There's a study out right now, and I'm not going to name any names. If you're watching this, you'll get a chuckle out of this, but if there's a study taking place right now around the country, we all have been told that stress and pressure obviously dictates the sex of the ratio of doe fawns or buck fawns, how many of each, or how that doe produces those hormones that whatever controls inside the doe's body and produces either more buck fawns or doe fawns. There's studies being out there right now in the process as we speak. I know this firsthand. Is there something to that as far as the stress? Now, we as hunters, you and I can talk about that as far as pressure, but as far as stress on the doe itself, as far as sheer numbers of does, which kind of ties into the first influencer here, but the sheer number of does, the stress factor, does that control or dictate? Now, there's some folks that are going to say out there that say the higher the doe number is in your area, the higher the stress factor, which makes more doe fawns. So if that's true, and you are in an area that you can tie yourself to that, higher the stress, higher the doe fawns. What's that mean to the rut? That means that you are going to have to control more of the doe so it doesn't get out of control. 1. 2, what it means is you're not going to see, you could possibly see a better second rut because there's more doe fawns coming into heat when they reach that 6 months old or in that 60 to 70 pounds weight bracket. So you have a better chance of seeing. So that's a good hunting thing, right? You're seeing more. You have potential to see more activity or second rut activity if you have more young does coming into heat. So the other side of that is the study showing that that's not the case. So the more the stress, the more bucks. So which is which, I don't know. Maybe someday you'll see that released, and we can somebody way smarter than me is way more book smart than me will release that someday, and then we can all kind of use that and make or break that. Now that's more focused on research facility right now than it is real world, but it's something to keep in mind. Is there something to it? Is there not? The pressure side of number 2, though, is what we can control. The pressure side of it is our hunting strategies and our hunting dictations that you and I do and that we control on a day-to-day basis. The pressure in one of the influences of the rut is does. Obviously, you got to have the does there. If you go in and you blow your farm out early, folks just wrap their whole season into the neighbors did this, the state did this, whatever. Very seldom are the fingers pointed at yourself, and it's a hard gig, don't get me wrong, But the pressure, if you can maintain a low pressure going into the early season, right straight through the rut, low pressure, only being there when it counts, only being there when the weather's good, and prolong your season, lengthen your season 90 days instead of being one of those short season properties that we talk about only 30 days in or 2 weeks in, and all of a sudden now you're in the October lull, and most properties never rebound from the October lull. What does that do to the rut? What it does to the rut is that can change the power that you are seeing during the rut. So it's a false perspective, right? It's a false analysis. This year it's good, next year it's not. What I highly recommend doing is I recommend sitting down with yourself and taking your field notes. What changed? If it changed for the good this year, is it something that you changed and you added more pressure, or you took more pressure away? And the reason I say that is once you understand that you can control the outcome, you will be a believer in letting the rest of it be in the Lord's hands, like I said, and as far as letting Him control, dictating when them fawns need to be on the ground so they survive in them northern climates and all that stuff that comes with it. We can make sure that them does aren't scattered, and one day they're here, the next day they're there. And what happens is that comes into a health standard point of it, because the habitat where they were bumped from here might have been perfect, and then the habitat where they're bumped to there might not be, or they're pressured into is not, and they're chasing their habitat around, and that alone dictates the stress level, plays into the stress level. So I highly encourage you to be one of those folks that start focusing more attention on the does, keeping those does calm, keeping those does at ease on your small hunting parcel, and I really believe that you'll see a better outcome, a better, steady, controlled outcome to the entire length of the rut process, if you put yourself in that equation. So the number 3 thing that we're going to touch on here with the influencers is nutrition. Nutrition is something that I think we all focus on, and again, we plant big beautiful food plots to see big, beautiful whitetail bucks, right? And there is so much more to it than that. There's so much more to having a quality mineral. That's why the states that don't allow mineral, the states that don't allow supplemental feeding, huge devastation to the health standard, in my opinion, can be a huge devastation to the health standard in your state. And here are the reasons why. So as my business grows and I'm able to reach out to more folks over the year and help create better, it's never perfect, but better habitat, obviously, because when I say it's never perfect, because you never know what the year is going to hand you, right, as far as drought, as far as too much water, as far as vegetation, burns, unforeseen situations. What we can do though is go the extra mile to really understand what your food plot is really doing to your property. All private properties should have a food source that's maintained as far as food plots. If you can't plant a food plot on a private piece of property that you own now, or you're looking at purchasing, 1, don't buy it, 2, sell it. You have to be able to do that. Now, are mass crops great? Yeah, they are, but there's so much more than either just having a large amount of mass crop, or a large amount of a standing cornfield where you think, I don't need to plant food plots because the corn is there. Well, folks, here's the deal, is in this game of health standards and nutrition standards, when it comes to the does, it all dictates, that the nutrition all dictates the power of the rut, and as you see it during the hunting season. So I strongly recommend going the extra mile to put the effort into the plots. Find out what those deer need. Don't plant a monoculture. If you're going to plant a monoculture of a food plot, make sure that's all the same all over the food plot for a hunting strategy side of it. But find out what your soil needs, and not only your soil, but what your deer needs, so the does are healthy going into the breeding season, and they're healthy during and coming out of the breeding season. And what you'll find is that will maintain a more steady rut than not. So how does that tie into what's changing, what's making the change. What I find is, especially number 3, this property down the road is changing. It's changing habits. This property, the next property down the road, is not changing their habits. They don't have any food, and the deer are being pressured now from farm A to farm B. And when that happens, and when that change takes place, we start seeing a overrun of nutrition changing. This property changes, that property doesn't. If there was the perfect world is if everybody had a balanced food source, but that's obviously never going to happen. So your goal is, on the nutrition side of it, is to do whatever you can inside of your legal statute in your state or in your area, and reach or exceed that, and try to make sure that those deer are healthy. If your does are healthy, your bucks are going to be healthy. They're going to have something to rebound after the rut. They're going to be more, sperm counts are going to be higher. The power of the rut is all going to dictate and fluctuate on that. So it has to start and it has to end with the nutrition of the food plots, the nutrition of the property itself. So and you can't do it alone. I highly recommend, if you're one of those folks that kind of hunt on a closed door window, well, it's some parts of the country. I'm in one of those here, or where I'm at here, our neighbors, everybody is kind of together, and that's one of the reasons I bought here and I'm living here. But on the other side, I understand that you can't talk to your neighbor over the fence because they trespass like crazy. So there's two totally different worlds, and I understand that because I've seen them and experienced both. But the fourth, we're going to throw a fourth in here as a bonus, and then we're going to call this one quits. The bonus the bonus on this, as far as an influencer, is huge. Buck harvest. You really need to study this year. Do we advance that 3.5-year-old buck into next year? He's 2 weeks or 3 weeks out from the end of the season in most states. Can we get him there? Do we need to, should we harvest him? This is when you can really, just like your does and your does numbers, you can really set the stage and set what you have yet to come in the future on your property in your area by trigger management on the bucks in your area and on your farm. So the more mature bucks that you have on a farm, the more rut production, the more rut valuable rut activity you're going to have during the first rut, and the more that you're going to have during the second rut. Where you start seeing the change that everyone is seeing right now is the fact that there's still still a large amount, and to each his own on trigger management. You kill what you need to, and that's great. But when you're comparing apples to apples, when you're online on these forums, please take that into consideration. 1, be respectful. 2, know what you're comparing. If you're not comparing apples to apples, don't make judgment calls, because this guy down the road, in Michigan's a perfect example. This guy down the road, the biggest deer that he's ever seen and harvested is a 2.5-year-old deer. Well, he's not going to experience the same rutting activity as a guy, half hour down the road, or maybe a guy 20 minutes down the road or an hour down the road that has a larger piece of ground, or is in an area where that it's the co-op or the teamwork is getting them more. They are going to experience a totally different rut than you are going to experience when you have mature deer. So all of the stuff that you see this channel here, because I'm blessed enough to have mature deer, a lot of stuff that you see on social media is geared towards how to react and how to hunt a mature buck, a mature whitetail buck environment. If you don't have mature bucks, then you have to fit this into your equation on what your mature buck is. But always remember that the higher that your buck the higher that your buck maturity level is, the higher the age class is, the more explosive rut you're going to experience. The lower that your age structure is in your area as far as your bucks, the less production and the less powerful your rut is going to be. Appreciate you tuning in. I've never asked this before. I've been told by my clients that I should do this. I really appreciate if you like this video. Subscribe and share. It helps the channel out, helps the business out, and most importantly, it helps you, the viewer, spread this word. And maybe there's a channel, maybe I'm the channel, you know, that's kind of a down-to-earth channel that can connect with a lot of you guys around the country, a lot of folks around the country in general, and we can all get to the end goal of having a successful whitetail hunting property. That's why I'm here. That's why I live and breathe, and you know, I'm whitetail driven 365 days a year is for that. So if you do like what you're seeing, guys, like, subscribe, and share these videos. I really would appreciate that. And so the next video you'll see coming down the road is the third video, and then we're off to some post-rut activity coming down the road here that we've got some really good hunts ahead of us, especially going into the Kentucky you know, late muzzleloader season. Thanks, guys.